In most of the ancient world, the sun was a man and the moon was a woman. The sun, blazing, dominant, impossible to look at directly, ruling the daylight hours when human beings work, fight, and are seen. The moon, cooler, changeable, ruling the night, associated with menstruation, tides, and the softer rhythms of the body. This pairing feels so natural to anyone raised within the Greek, Roman, or broader European mythological tradition that it can seem less like a cultural choice and more like an obvious fact about the universe itself. And then you arrive in Japan, and you discover that the supreme deity of the entire Shinto pantheon, the ancestor of the imperial line itself, the ruler of the sun, is a woman. You arrive in Scandinavia, and you discover the sun is a goddess, Sol, driven across the sky in a chariot to escape a pursuing wolf, while the moon is her brother, Mani, pursued by a different wolf entirely. You arrive among the ancient Egyptians, and you find a sun god, Ra, who is unambiguously masculine, but whose most important lunar counterpart, Thoth, god of wisdom and the moon, is also male, leaving no obvious feminine celestial body in the pairing at all. The gendering of the sun and moon, it turns out, was never a universal human intuition. It was a choice made independently by dozens of civilizations, and the specific choice each civilization made reveals something remarkably precise about how that civilization actually understood power, gender, and the relationship between the visible and the invisible. Begin with the pattern most familiar to Western audiences, because Greek and Roman mythology established the template that later European culture would treat as default. Helios, in Greek tradition, drives his blazing chariot across the sky each day, drawn by 4 fire-breathing horses, his light so total and so relentless that the myth of his son Phaethon, who begs to drive the chariot for a single day and loses control so catastrophically that Zeus must strike him down with a thunderbolt to prevent the earth itself from burning, functions as a direct warning about the sheer, barely containable power the sun represents. Selene, his sister, drives a considerably gentler chariot across the night sky, drawn by white horses or oxen, most famously remembered for her love affair with the mortal shepherd Endymion, whom she visits nightly after Zeus grants him eternal sleep and eternal youth, specifically so their relationship could continue undisturbed by his aging or death. The later Roman tradition and the classical revival that shaped centuries of European art and literature afterward absorbed this gendering so completely that Sol and Luna became linguistic as well as mythological defaults, embedding grammatical gender directly into the Romance languages that descended from Latin. Le soleil is masculine in French. La lune is feminine. A linguistic fact millions of people absorb without ever considering it as a live theological claim, rather than simply how language works. What is significant here is how thoroughly this specific pairing, sun as male and moon as female, became naturalized specifically because of Rome's enormous, lasting cultural and linguistic influence across Western Europe, making a culturally specific choice feel, many centuries later, like an obvious fact requiring no explanation at all. In Egypt, the solar theology reaches a level of complexity and centrality that dwarfs almost every other tradition surveyed in this examination, because Ra was never merely one god among many, but frequently functioned as the effective center of the entire Egyptian pantheon, understood as traveling across the sky by day in his solar bark and then descending into the underworld each night to battle the chaos serpent, Apophis, a nightly cosmic struggle already examined in the context of serpent symbolism, before triumphantly rising again each dawn as visible proof that order had once again defeated chaos for one more day. Ra's masculinity is essentially unquestioned across every major period of Egyptian religious history, frequently merged with other major male deities, most significantly in the composite figure Amun-Ra, combining the hidden, mysterious power of Amun with the visible, radiant power of the sun into Egypt's most theologically dominant divine configuration during the New Kingdom period. What makes Egypt distinctive within this survey, however, is the relative absence of an equally prominent, gendered lunar counterpart. Thoth, the primary Egyptian lunar deity, ibis-headed, associated with writing, wisdom, mathematics, and the precise measurement of time, is unambiguously masculine, meaning Egyptian cosmology, unlike the Greek, Roman, and many other traditions surveyed here, did not organize its two great celestial lights into a male-female complementary pairing at all. This absence is itself significant. It demonstrates that the sun-male, moon-female pattern, however common across world mythology, was never so instinctively necessary that every solar-focused civilization felt compelled to produce a female lunar counterpart to complete a perceived cosmic symmetry. And then there is Japan, where the entire pattern inverts so completely and so consequentially that it reshaped the political theology of an entire nation for well over 1,000 years. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, occupies the supreme position in the Shinto pantheon, and her mythology, preserved in Japan's oldest chronicles, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, both compiled in the early 8th century CE, describes an event of such cosmic significance that it functions as Japanese mythology's closest equivalent to a near apocalypse. When Amaterasu's brother, the storm god, Susanoo, commits a series of escalating outrages against her, destroying her rice fields, defiling her weaving hall, and in the most severe version of the myth, flinging a flayed horse through the roof of the hall where her weaving maidens work, causing fatal injury. Amaterasu, in horror and grief, withdraws into the Ama no Iwato, the heavenly rock cave, sealing the entrance behind her. Her withdrawal plunges the entire universe into total darkness, not merely night, but the complete absence of the sun altogether, and the resulting chaos, described across the mythology in terms of ravenous evil spirits running unchecked through the permanently darkened world, becomes so severe that the 8 million assembled gods of the Shinto pantheon must collaborate on an elaborate scheme to lure her back out. The goddess Ame no Uzume performs a wild, comic, deliberately provocative dance on an overturned tub, exposing herself in a manner that causes the assembled gods to roar with laughter loud enough that Amaterasu, curious what could possibly be happening outside her cave when the world has supposedly gone dark and desolate, peers out to look. At that exact moment, the gods hold up a mirror, and Amaterasu, seeing her own radiant reflection for the first time and mistaking it for a rival, more magnificent goddess, is drawn further out of the cave in fascination, at which point the god Ame no Tajikaro pulls her fully out, and another god seals the cave entrance behind her, permanently restoring the sun to the world. What makes this myth so significant beyond its narrative drama is its direct political consequence. Amaterasu was understood, from Japan's earliest recorded history through the entire imperial period until 1946, when Emperor Hirohito formally renounced the claim under post-war Allied pressure to be the direct divine ancestor of the imperial line itself, meaning the supreme solar deity of the entire tradition and the divine legitimating source of Japan's actual political sovereignty for well over a millennium, was explicitly, consistently female, an arrangement almost precisely inverted from the male solar sovereignty that characterized Egypt, Mesopotamia, and most of the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds simultaneously. In Scandinavia, the Norse tradition inverts the familiar Greco-Roman pairing while introducing a distinctive element largely absent from the traditions examined so far: genuine, ongoing cosmic danger built directly into the daily movement of both celestial bodies. Sol, the sun, and Mani, the moon, are siblings, children of a figure named Mundilfari, who, according to Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, named his children after the sun and moon themselves out of sheer pride in their beauty, an act of hubris that angered the gods sufficiently that they placed both children in the sky to drive the chariots of the sun and moon as a form of punishment, or, at minimum, a permanent, inescapable cosmic duty. Both siblings are perpetually pursued across the sky by wolves, Skoll chasing Sol, Hati chasing Mani, an ongoing chase that Norse mythology explicitly identifies as the ultimate source of solar and lunar eclipses, understood as moments when the pursuing wolves, briefly, partially catch their prey, and destined to end catastrophically at Ragnarok, when both wolves finally succeed in devouring their respective celestial targets entirely, plunging the world into darkness as one of the specific, named catastrophes marking the beginning of the apocalyptic sequence already examined in the broader context of Norse eschatology. What distinguishes the Norse solar-lunar pairing from the Greco-Roman one, beyond the reversed genders, is this built-in, permanent precariousness. Sol and Mani are not simply divine figures performing a stately, secure daily circuit the way Helios and Selene generally are. They are prey, perpetually fleeing, their continued success at outrunning their pursuers a daily, uncertain achievement rather than a guaranteed cosmic fact, embedding directly into Norse solar and lunar theology the same fatalistic awareness of ultimate defeat that characterizes the broader Norse understanding of the gods' relationship to their own inevitable downfall. In Mesopotamia, the sun and moon achieve a genealogical relationship distinct from either the sibling pairing found in Greece and Scandinavia or the singular supremacy of Egyptian Ra, because the moon god Sin, also known as Nana in Sumerian tradition, is understood as senior to and the father of the sun god Utu, also known as Shamash in Akkadian, reversing the relative status many other traditions assign between the two bodies. Nana Sin, associated with the crescent moon specifically, worshipped with particular intensity at the great temple complex of was understood to determine the calendar itself through the visible phases of his crescent, giving the moon god a foundational, time-establishing authority that the sun, in most other traditions examined here, more typically claims for itself. Utu Shamash, by contrast, though solar and therefore associated with light, visibility, and the ability to see all things happening beneath the sun's gaze, became particularly and specifically linked to justice and correct judgment, precisely because of this all-seeing solar visibility. The sun god, who witnesses every human action performed in daylight, becomes, through a natural extension of that constant witnessing, the specific patron of legal correctness and truthful testimony, a role reflected directly in the famous stele of Hammurabi, which depicts the Babylonian king receiving the laws of his celebrated code directly from a seated Shamash. This Mesopotamian arrangement moon as senior, calendar establishing father, sun as junior, justice establishing witness demonstrates yet another entirely distinct logic for organizing the relationship between the two great lights, one based not primarily on gender at all but on functional seniority and specific administrative domain, moon governing time itself and sun governing the visibility that makes justice possible. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec tradition ties its sun and moon mythology directly to the broader cosmology of the five suns, already examined in the context of apocalyptic myth, through the specific narrative explaining how the current sun, Tonatiuh, came to occupy the sky. According to the account preserved in sources including the Florentine Codex, the gods gather at Teotihuacan in darkness, needing a volunteer willing to sacrifice himself in fire to become the new sun. The wealthy, arrogant god Tecatl volunteers first, expecting the honor, but when the moment arrives to leap into the sacrificial fire, his courage fails him repeatedly. The humble, disease-scarred god Nanawatson, by contrast, leaps immediately and without hesitation when his turn comes, and the shamed Tecatl finally follows only after witnessing Nanawatson's courage. Both gods rise into the sky as equally bright celestial bodies until the other assembled gods, judging it inappropriate for two suns of identical brilliance to share the sky. Throw a rabbit directly into Techisticoatl's face, dimming his light and transforming him into the moon, his diminished glow explaining both the moon's lesser brightness relative to the sun and the rabbit-shaped markings still visible on the lunar surface in traditional Mesoamerican astronomical observation. What is distinctive about this account, compared to nearly every other tradition surveyed here, is its complete inversion of the usual mythological relationship between divine status and celestial assignment. Rather than the more powerful, senior deity naturally claiming the more prestigious sun, it is specifically the humbler, self-sacrificing, physically afflicted god who becomes the sun through demonstrated courage, while the wealthier, more hesitant, and ultimately cowardly god is punished with the diminished lunar role, embedding a direct moral lesson about humility and courage into the very astronomical structure of the sky itself. In China, the sun-moon relationship achieves one of world mythology's most emotionally resonant configurations through the intertwined stories of Hui, the archer, and his wife Chang'e. Mythology already touched upon in the context of the fire-stealing hero archetype through the related tale of 10 suns rising simultaneously and threatening to burn the world. After Hui shoots down 9 of the 10 suns to save humanity from that catastrophic overabundance of solar heat, leaving exactly 1 sun, Re, to properly govern the daylight sky, he is rewarded by the Queen Mother of the West with an elixir of immortality, but one insufficient in quantity for both himself and his wife to share. According to the most widespread version of the story, Chang'e either drinks the elixir herself to prevent it falling into the hands of a treacherous apprentice attempting to steal it during Hui's absence, or drinks it voluntarily in a moment of personal ambition or self-sacrifice depending on the telling, and immediately begins floating upward, eventually settling on the moon, Yu, where she remains eternally, sometimes accompanied by a jade rabbit perpetually grinding the ingredients for more elixir, visible to this day in the traditional Chinese interpretation of the moon's surface markings and permanently separated from her husband, who remains bound to the earth below. This myth, still central to the Mid-Autumn Festival celebrated across China and much of East Asia, where families gather specifically to view the full moon and reflect on themes of separation and longing, positions the sun as a shared, communal danger successfully tamed through Hui's decisive earthly action, while the moon becomes specifically feminine through Chang'e's individual, isolating transformation, a woman rendered eternal and luminous, but permanently removed from ordinary human connection and family life, gendering the two celestial bodies not through cosmic battle or political genealogy, as in several traditions already examined, but through an intimate domestic tragedy of separation between a husband who remains grounded and a wife who ascends beyond his reach. So why did this fundamental gendering vary so dramatically across civilizations that could not have influenced one another, when so many other mythological patterns examined throughout this survey, the flood, the dying god, the world tree, the sacred mountain, recur, with far more structural consistency regardless of which specific civilization is telling the story? The most persuasive answer involves the specific, observed relationship each civilization maintained with agricultural and social power, and which celestial body that civilization associated with the source of its own political legitimacy. Where solar visibility, warmth, and the growing season were most directly tied to centralized, hierarchical, frequently patriarchal royal authority, Egypt's pharaoh as living representative of Ra, Mesopotamia's kings receiving law directly from Shamash, the eventual Roman emperor cult's direct solar associations, the sun consistently trends male, mapped directly onto existing structures of male political sovereignty, where solar authority instead became the specific, foundational, legitimating source for an actual reigning female-descended political lineage, as in Japan's unbroken imperial connection to Amaterasu, or where the civilization in question organized its cosmology around functional domain, moral courage, or intimate personal tragedy, rather than a strict, pre-existing gender hierarchy. As in the Aztec sun through sacrifice narrative, or the Chinese story of Chang'e's isolating ascent, the pattern could invert entirely, or dissolve into a different organizing logic altogether. There is also a deeper structural observation worth making about why so many civilizations, even when they disagreed about which gender belonged to which body, nonetheless agreed on assigning gender to the sun and moon at all, when they did not necessarily gender every other significant natural phenomenon with equal consistency. The sun and moon are unusual among celestial and natural phenomena in offering two, and only two, dominant, regularly alternating presences governing the sky, one giving way to the other in a perpetual, visible rhythm every single day and night of every human life ever lived. A civilization searching for the most natural available symbolic vocabulary to represent complementary pairing, alternation, and reciprocal relationship needed to look no further than the sky directly above every single settlement on Earth, where two bodies, unmistakably different from each other in brightness, color, and behavior, visibly took turns governing the visible world in a pattern that repeated with total, reassuring reliability. The sun and moon themselves, as physical objects, offered every civilization on Earth the exact same observable behavior, one blazing and constant, ruling the visible, working hours of daylight, one cooler, cyclical, and changeable, ruling the night and tracking, through its phases, the passage of time itself. What each civilization did with that shared, universal observation, which gender they assigned to blazing constancy, which gender they assigned to cyclical change, and how directly they tied either assignment to their own structures of earthly political power reveals, with remarkable precision, exactly how each civilization understood the relationship between visibility and authority, between constancy and legitimacy, and between the body that rules the sky and the bodies that claimed, here on the ground, the right to rule in its name.